European leaders met in Brussels late last week for a summit to tackle the sharp rise in energy prices, driven in part by the ongoing instability in the Middle East. The EU is now looking at a range of measures, including cutting electricity taxes and allowing governments more flexibility to support households and businesses. But what will that mean for people here in Ireland, and what should our representatives be pushing for at European level? For more of this, I'm joined by the Ireland South MEP, independent, of course, from Scariff, Michael McNamara. Michael, good morning to you.
Good morning, Alan.
Thanks very much for being with us. So there's talk of tax cuts on electricity, more state aid. People will wonder, are these short-term fixes enough? Are we facing a longer-term energy crisis? And when they hear the Commission say measures will be temporary and targeted, people will be thinking, God, how long or how little are we going to get any relief for?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree completely with you. I mean, this is not going to be a short, unfortunately, regardless of what happens in the coming weeks, and I'm not very optimistic, but regardless of what happens, this crisis is going to continue for some time. I mean, we saw COVID measures introduced, and we were told that this was going to be a very temporary, for a couple of weeks measure, and it dragged out for a couple of years. Equally, we saw cost of living measures introduced. I mean, I think the government have to acknowledge the reality that this is going to be, we're in this for some time now, and we're going to be in it for some time. But as regards EU measures, I mean, I'm happy with what the Commission is proposing. I want to see it brought to a reality. But, you know, the vast majority of taxes that are levied on fuels in Ireland are levied by the national government and at the behest of the national government. While EU does have minimum excise rates on both petrol and diesel, they're only about 2/3 of the rate of the excise rate that the Irish government choose to levy. The EU does require VAT on fuel, but again, it's only about 2/3 of what the Irish government choose to levy. The carbon tax is a uniquely Irish measure. It increased at the start of this year. The better energy levy was increased at the start of this year. That's a uniquely Irish proposal that Fianna Fáil introduced when they were in government with the Greens. The blended rate increased at the start of this year, which made it more expensive. So all of these are uniquely Irish measures, and you know, it's something I raised with Michael McGrath. I recalled with him in the Parliament last Strasbourg a couple of weeks ago, that, you know, when the pressure comes on locally, the tendency is of national politicians is to shrug their shoulders and blame Europe, but the majority of taxes are levied by Europe. But moreover, there are other measures that we've taken in Ireland which to me don't make a huge amount of sense. I mean, we have banned exploration for natural gas off the west coast of Ireland. We know that there was a Corrib gas field. The method in which it was done was highly controversial, but there is more gas off the west coast of Ireland, and we need to start looking at that now instead of wondering where on earth are we going to get gas from to make electricity. I mean, people sort of in Ireland say, oh, let's move to electricity, that's a magic solution, but not if our electricity has been generated by gas, and of course a large part of that gas comes from the Gulf, from Qatar, states that are no longer exporting that.
And so, sorry to jump in, Michael, but can I ask you about that? Do you think, I mean, this crisis, you know, as you've said, and I think a lot of people would agree with you, it looks like it's going to continue for some time. We're hearing energy bosses saying that this conflict in the Middle East is very severe and it is going to continue for some time. Is this the wake-up call we need here in Ireland to prioritise acceleration towards, as you say, exploring what gas is there, renewables as well, to reduce our dependence on imported fossil fuels?
Absolutely, but I mean, I think, you know, people who think that we can just put up more windmills and that'll solve our problems, I think are naive in the extreme. I mean, we do need to look at other solutions, including exploration as well as renewables, because I mean, the risk that I see now is that we're going to just plonk in wind farms in the very few remaining places where there's a bit of biodiversity. I mean, there's a wind farm going in near where I live. I mean, farmers can't cut rushes because in order to protect the hen harrier, but I mean, Quail Chenny can put in a wind farm where the hen harriers are nesting, and farmers are going to look up and see that. I mean, we do need to have a bit of reality about what we do as well, and sort of there's always this tendency in Ireland to hysterically jump at the latest proposal. I mean, wind farms are fine, but they have to be properly situated, and in Ireland, like, the planning system is not in place to determine the environmental consequences of where they're going, and they are tending to be going in the few places where there's any biodiversity left. But wind farms alone, notwithstanding all of the wind farms that we see in Ireland, and there's a lot of them coming online now, the share of energy being produced from wind farms is no greater than it was before because of the increased amount of energy we use. Now, people say data centres are appalling, etc., but they are part of our economy. I mean, there will be people listening to this programme later when it's being streamed from the internet. That means it's coming from a data centre. People use Facebook, people use TikTok, people use search engines, Google, all of those regularly. They all require data centres, and we are probably the biggest beneficiaries in Europe of that tech revolution, because all those companies, are the vast majority of those companies, have their European headquarters here and pay taxes here. If they leave, then we can't afford our social welfare system. So we do need to be realistic about the energy demands of a first world economy, and I don't believe that they will be met from windmills. I simply don't. But I'm not against them where properly situated. The other thing we have to look at is, like in countries like Denmark, there's a community dividend. In Ireland, they supply football jerseys and other relatively nice sort of things, but ultimately economically meaningless contributions to the local economy, and there's actually no real gain for the local economy, and there is a reduction in land values, etc. We do need to look at the structure of those wind farms so that companies like Quilcha and ESB can't come in and make a killing off local communities without meaningfully contributing back. I mean, football jerseys, yeah, great, but I mean, put up a set of goalposts in the local GA club and then walk away and make billions in profit. I mean, that's kind of what's happening, and we do need to look at that too in terms of how we're going to structure energy supply in Ireland going forward.
I want to get back to what can and should and will happen at European level, but you touched on what our own national government could and maybe should do, and we're hearing, of course, details of measures to cut the cost of fuel. They'll be agreed by Micheál Martin, Simon Harris and independent leaders in government tonight. It's expected there'll be a mixture of excise cuts, extended fuel allowance payments for households. There'll be diesel rebates for hauliers. We were joined by Eugene Drennan last week to talk about this. Of course, they held back on their protest action. And indeed, hauliers want government supports for the industry to be kept under review. Is what's being proposed by the government sufficient? What do you think the government should bring in? I mean, these excise cuts, should they be longer term?
I think excise cuts and VAT reduction for fuel. I mean, the cost of diesel now, even before this happened, is pretty unsustainable. I mean, obviously, all fuels affect every household. But if you look at who's most affected by the cost of diesel, it's people who are getting up in the morning, driving long distances, who use diesel as a fuel to get them to and from work, and who use diesel as a fuel to do their work. And I mean, it's very, I think, economically damaging to Middle Ireland, that I think there's a tendency of government to kind of look down on. I mean, I noticed when I was last in the Dáil, like small representative bodies of ordinary people up and down the west coast of Ireland had no access to government, whereas the big corporations were being pictured marching in and out of government buildings. I mean, we do have to tailor our economy to suit like the ordinary people, the self-employed, those who are employing one or two people, and they're the ones who are most affected by these energy jumps. I mean, the other thing that is going to be hugely affected, of course, is fertiliser, is the cost of A, farming generally, because the farmers use diesel, and B, fertilisers, which are intrinsically linked to costs as well. I mean, of fuel, and they come from that part of the world. I mean, a lot of fertilisers come from the part of the world that's affected. A lot of fertilisers come from Ukraine and Russia, which obviously that's embargoed now by the European Union. We do need to look at this because there's going to be a massive increase in the cost of producing food in Ireland this spring. I mean, I think even in terms of those who cut silage, etc., start to saying, well, look, unless there's huge measures taken out, we're simply not going to be able to cut silage. I don't know who's going to cut it for you, but we're not going to do it because we're not going to be able to afford to do it. Of course, if there's no silage made, we're not going to be able to keep cattle through next winter, and that's going to have a huge impact. So this is having this is going to be one of the biggest shocks to the Irish economy that we've seen in decades, far greater than COVID in some respects. And the government are going to have to plan for the enormity of this and plan long term, because this isn't going to be over by midsummer, in my view anyway. And I mean, the first thing, and I appreciate, I'm incredibly lucky to be able to do it, but the first thing that I did when I heard that they'd started bombing Iran was to order some fuel. I appreciate that not everybody can do that. I know I'm very lucky, but the point I'm trying to make is that Donald Trump says nobody told him it was going to have an impact on fuel prices. I mean, that beggars belief. I mean, I'm just a local representative, and he's supposed to be the leader of the free world, and he didn't grasp that this is going to happen. I find that extraordinary. If that's the level of leadership we have in the world, the problems are going to continue for some time.
Just getting back to what can be done at European level. So we've mentioned the tax cuts on electricity, more state aid. What else can the EU realistically do right now outside of what we should expect from our national government to bring down energy bills for households in Ireland? And will we see a noticeable difference?
Well, I suppose the big other thing that can be done is breaking that link between the cost of electricity and the cost of gas. Now, I suppose it's not going to have as big an impact in Ireland as it is in other parts of Europe because so much of our, even under the Greens, new gas generators were imported into Ireland as a solution. So intrinsically, the cost of making electricity in Ireland is very linked to the cost of gas. But one thing the EU can do and is doing is going to be improving and investing in the improvement of grid infrastructure so that electricity can flow from parts of Europe where there is a greater excess at any given time to parts where there's a deficit at any given time. But that's not something that's going to take. That will ultimately take a decade or more. But it is something that needed to be done 10 years ago. It wasn't, so now we suffer the consequences. We need to make sure that we're not suffering those consequences in 10 years' time. But I don't want to see, though, is money being thrown around like it was during COVID, where we see that there's still tens of millions of euros owed for money that was literally just washed around the place because, as I say, these corporations pay taxes in Ireland. We're awash with money. Sometimes it seems the government doesn't know what to do with it. It needs to be targeted. And I think the tax decreases and long-term tax decreases on fuels are welcome and are one of the few things the government can do and should be doing. Also they need to examine this whole carbon tax and better energy and NORA taxes and the myriad of taxes that they don't.
That doesn't seem likely, though, does it, Michael? Looking at the carbon tax, it was something certainly when Hauliers were speaking with Darragh O'Brien. It seemed that any sort of review of the carbon tax was just off the table.
No, it doesn't seem likely. But we were told that these carbon taxes would be introduced so that the money would be there to invest in alternatives. But if you live in East Clare or West Clare, or where are the additional trains if you want to get to Dublin? You're still getting in your car, and like 40 years ago, people would drive to the local railway station to be able to get a train. Now, there are no more trains now than there are then, despite the increased demand. So, where are these carbon taxes going? Where are the alternative measures? Particularly now with the cost of fuel, there's a huge incentive to get a train if there were additional trains. But like Bird Hill is a railway station, and many listeners across Clare might know where it is. But for those of us in East Clare would know well, from basically Scariff down to Clonlara, Bird Hill would be the local railway station. It's barely served. And there's a lot of people from that area driving up and down to Dublin regularly, burning fuel at $2.12 a litre now, I see, and $2.19, $2.20 a litre for diesel. People would love to be able to get trains, but where are they? What's the government doing with these carbon taxes? Very little, it seems, unfortunately, other than talking about building an underground line to Dublin Airport, which is, great. I welcome it. I question the cost of it. There's alternatives through Clongriffin, which are a fraction of that, but maybe not as glamorous. But how about putting on just trains for people in the rest of Ireland so that they can move around? So that, like if you have to drive from Clare to Cork or Clare to Waterford, if you could get a train, it's one you would because of the length of time it takes and the quality of the roads. But where are the trains? They're not there.
The easing of state aid rules, Michael, could widen gaps between the larger and smaller countries, the richer or poorer countries, if you will. How do we ensure a level playing field, and could Irish businesses be at a disadvantage compared to French or German companies?
I don't really see that. I don't think Ireland is a poor country by European standards by any stretch. It was certainly when we joined the European Union, but our progress has been remarkable. I simply don't think that that's a concern for Ireland. It might be a concern for some other smaller countries, maybe in the east of the bloc, but certainly not for Ireland.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for being with us. That is the independent MEP for Ireland South, Michael McNamara. And joining us now is the Fianna Fáil Ireland South MEP, Billy Kelleher, who's with us as well. Billy, good morning to you, and thanks very much for joining us. So we've just been chatting with Michael about all of that. I just wonder, asking you, and indeed I'll put it out to the listeners as well, we'd love to get your thoughts on this and what Michael had to say. 0818 400 964 to call us, and 086 1800 964 is our text and WhatsApp number. Michael was putting the onus really on national governments. We've heard that the details of the measures to cut the cost of fuel will be agreed tonight by the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach and the leaders of the independents. What do you make of what you're seeing, and is it enough?
Well, look, I mean, obviously they're going to have to target energy support. The cost of energy is going to continue to escalate if this crisis in the Middle East continues to unfold. You know, we really have seen an escalation over the last number of days, not only the rhetoric, but in terms of actual exchange of missiles and drones across the Middle East. So this really is putting huge pressure on infrastructure and then ultimately on the cost of energy, both at the pump, but in terms of generation as well. So, I mean, the national governments will have to address this issue in terms of targeted measures, targeted supports for families.
And in terms of what you're hearing about those targeted supports, it sounds like the measures that are going to be announced will contain a mix of excise cuts, extended fuel allowance payments for households. There'll be diesel rebates for hauliers, and we heard from hauliers last week they want to see any supports kept under review and to be more long term. Is that sufficient in your view?
Well, look, I mean, it's a start because, I mean, this situation is continually unfolding. We don't know how long this particular crisis will last, how long it will have an impact on, you know, the cost of fuel and the cost of energy in general. So, I mean, it is a start. We're 3.5 weeks into the war. You know, this is unfolding. So I do welcome the potential announcement, and I look forward to tomorrow. It needs to be targeted, needs to be measured. It needs to, you know, go to those that are most vulnerable, and also to the areas of the economy that are critically important.
Can I ask you, Billy, should the time frame be more open-ended? Because we don't know how long this conflict's going to go on for, but it does seem like it's going to continue for some time. Should these measures be brought in and last as long as this crisis lasts?
Well, we don't know how long the crisis will last, but I mean, I think it's clear that the government has reacted to a situation with regard to the cost of energy and the cost of fuel. We welcome that. But I mean, we also have to try and ensure that, you know, at some stage we have to get to a dialogue whereby energy is not used to put pressure on the entire world economy. And, you know, the United States and Israel and Iran, the three protagonists in this, you know, we have to get to a stage where the entire population of the world is not being held to ransom with the cost of energy, and now energy being used as the key bargaining chip between the United States, Israel and Iran. You know, threats to destroy Iranian energy, retaliatory strikes on Gulf states, you know, oil infrastructure and gas infrastructure. This will clearly have a potentially detrimental effect on the global economy, and those that are hurt most are the ones that, you know, are least likely to be able to carry that cost.
The European Commission is saying the measures, it's likely to bring in tax cuts on electricity, more state aid and so on, are going to be temporary and targeted. Again, should the time frame in those be more open-ended because we don't know how long this conflict is going to last? And is what's been announced at European level sufficient as well? I mean, will it make much of a difference to Irish consumers and our energy bills?
Well, look, ultimately from the European perspective, I mean, we have to ensure that we've sufficient supply. That's a critically important component in all of this, that the European Union has the capacity to you know, keep itself supplied with energy and fuel. That's the first step. The second step then is to see where they can, you know, maybe address some of the policies that are in place with regard to, you know, emissions trading schemes, CBAMs and other areas that we have been using to good effect to wean ourselves off, you know, fossil fuels, and whether or not they are now an impediment at the moment. All these things are continually under review, and, you know, it is a completely, you know, uncertain period of time we're in. So I think what's happening is national governments have to address the issue immediately with regard to tax cuts, excise cuts, etc., on fuel and energy, and then the European Union has to look at it in the context of, you know, what areas they're causing difficulties in with regard to additional costs. But most importantly, we need to guarantee that we have sufficient supply of fuel and energy in general across the European Union. And that could be a significant challenge if this drags out much longer.
And what will you be fighting for in Brussels over the coming weeks to ensure the people of Ireland are as protected as possible from rising energy costs?
Well, that there's absolute flexibility with regard to state aid, for example, that in the event of there being key areas of an economy that are under huge pressure, that we can act swiftly to address those particular issues. That would be one of the major concerns, that we have not enough flexibility to respond quickly. So I welcome those announcements from the Commission. We have to continually look at areas of European policy that may be impacting on the cost of fuel initially. Also the issue of fertilizer. Fertilizer is a significant issue here as well. The price goes up. Well, then that means a knock-on effect in the cost of food to families as well. So it's just not fuel directly. It is also the secondary costs that will be incurred by citizens with increased fertilizer costs, increased food costs, and that spiralling inflationary cycle where you've got a potentially interest rate rises again into the future. So look, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's a lot of anxiety out there, but most importantly, governments and the European Union have to do two things: address it in a targeted manner, and also make sure that we have sufficient energy for the foreseeable future.
Okay, we do have to leave it there. Thanks to the Fianna Fáil Ireland South MEP Billy Kelleher for being with us. Whatever measures are brought in by the government or indeed at European level, and I've tried asking Billy about it there. The time frame, the European Commission saying to be temporary and targeted. How long or how short a time period is temporary? And whatever's announced by the government, should that be more open-ended in terms of the time frame? It's no point in having cuts to excise duty and all this kind of stuff if it's only going to last for a month and the conflict's going to last until the end of the year or longer.